What does it really mean to invent a skateboard trick? Is it just being the first one to land it, or does it have to be something completely new? What does it take to invent a skateboard trick? I want to talk about this in 3 different ways: single tricks, combos, and trick theory, which is where things get a little bit hairy. Transworld ran an article a few years ago about how Ollie Mills was the first person to do a nollie flip on camera, and questioning whether he invented it. And it's a bit of a hairy situation because nollies were not new and kickflips weren't new, so does he really deserve invention credit for it? Well, they interviewed Mullen about it, and this is what he had to say. Heel flips were done with hardly a nod, merely as putting a minus sign on a kickflip on one axis. I don't remember when, but it was clearly shortly after kickflips were first done. Editorial note, circa 1983. Fakie kickflips were not even considered a variation then, same with fakie heel flips, minus signs directionally, could make the same argument for double flips. Point being, I'm not sure if it's worth bothering. Certainly it isn't for me. Basically, Rodney learned every trick every which way. This certainly included what would today be called a nollie flip, but at the time, calling those variations anything different than a kickflip hadn't occurred to anybody. Still, he was willing to give Ollie credit with some caveats, if only for officially making it a street trick. Rodney Mullen: by all means give Ollie credit for nollie flips as a street trick if that's in your heart to do, but also realize by that time clearly other forms were done, and could be as hard to designate as a backside shove, concomitantly potentially taking credit from other street dudes and stirring up strife, as these things sometimes do. See, this is complicated, and it's a good point. Mullen invented popping the tail and kicking the board to make it flip either this way or that way. If someone did it in a different stance, riding a different direction, does that actually count as a new trick? And there has to be a cutoff somewhere, because no one says Dave Baczynski invented kick flipping 20 stairs. He didn't invent anything. He took a trick that already existed and applied it in a way that no one had the ability to do yet. Very impressive, not an invention. Adapting a freestyle trick from flat ground to street, again, very impressive, very important, pushes skateboarding forward, not an invention. But what about combos? Because if you can count a combo as an invention, then Day One Song invented a ton of tricks, right? What about a kickflip manual kickflip out? Even if someone had done the flip in and the flip out separately, is it an invention when someone does them both at the same time? I don't think so. Let's take the Bennett grind as an example. Now, Matt Bennett does not take credit for inventing the trick, which is a backside 180 to switch backside Smith. And it's not very likely that he was the first to do it. But for the sake of argument, does he have any claim on the trick? Mike Smith was the first to do a Smith grind. We have Monty Noller, the first to do a backside Smith grind. We have Donnie Barley, the first to, he spun frontside into a switch frontside Smith. And in this version of history, Matt Bennett was the first to do the Bennett grind. Real history right here. Does that count? To me, it definitely does not, because you could do a 270 into a lip slide, you can do a nose grind, shove it out, you can add any 2 tricks together and call it a new trick, but just because you spun into a grind, that doesn't make it a new thing. You just did it in a slightly different way. So to me, doing a combo can never really be considered an invention. But what about doing a trick in theory? Can you invent a trick by coming up with the idea and not being the first to land it, or possibly by being the first to land a trick that other people had thought up before? Let's look at a couple of stories about that. The boneless was invented by GSD, talked about that in a video a while back and converted it into a short recently, but let's pay close attention to the actual story. In December 1979, influenced by a trick I saw in Skateboarder magazine called the foot plant, done backside playing the rear foot, I thought up a frontside version playing the front foot. It all happened when Robert Hamrick, Mark Mount, and I were messing around with our boards while sitting on the floor in Robert's house. We considered this trick impossible and promptly forgot about it for the next few months. Mark called me up in the spring of that year breathless, announcing he'd just pulled that trick I had thought up. I rushed down to the D.O. banks in Cincinnati, only to find him popping boneless ones 3 feet off the main bank. Within a few minutes, I was doing that impossible trick too. We were blown away with how much higher and easier we could boost than with a backside foot plant. In other words, the guy that everyone universally agrees invented the boneless was not the first person to actually do it. But since he came up with the idea, he still gets the inventor credit. What about the opposite? What about the McTwist? Spinning 540 on a skateboard is not a brilliant idea. It's a very difficult thing to come up with, but the idea to spin 540, not really all that inventive. Now, for the McTwist, it does invert a bit, but you can think about the 900. Did Tony Hawk invent the 900 just because he was the first to do it when other people had come up with it as well? That one is a bit of a tough call. But there is one more ultimate example. Before we get to it, I would like to thank Sean for submitting this question. He did so by going to Rad Rat Video and using the form there on the homepage. There are some shirts you can take a look at, and you can submit questions through Patreon to get a guaranteed answer as well. So here's my example. A couple years ago, I met with Andy Anderson, and he was working on a video project, and that part recently just came out. I don't know if I can link to it since it's not on my channel, but definitely check it out. It's a great video. One of the trick ideas that I came up with, the way I remember going down, was do a Coco wheelie, which is like a Primo slide except tilted so that the wheels can roll, and do it up to a curb and push the board up into a slappy. And he did it. At least he did something similar to it. He did a Primo slide into a lip slide, which was actually a lot harder. But for the sake of argument, let's say he did the exact thing that I came up with. Does that mean that I invented that trick? Now let's say I even tried it with him and he was just the first person to land it. Did I invent it? That's very similar to the boneless story, isn't it? That's an interesting question. I would like to hear your thoughts about that in the comments. But here's where I land on it. You can invent a single trick. 360 flip, crooked grind, even, big spin flips, front crooks, be different versions of those tricks that can be invented. Combos cannot. Half cab crooked grind is not an invention. It's just slapping two things together. No slide shove it doesn't count. And if you come up with the idea but you don't land it, or vice versa, you're a co-inventor at best. And also, you cannot adapt tricks. There's no snowboarder who invented the stale fish because they took it from skateboarding. So those are my thoughts on that. Let me know what you think in the comments, and here are some more videos that you might want to check out to learn a little bit more about skateboarding. Thanks for hanging out.